Today, I am joined by Stacy Trasancos. Dr. Stacy Trasancos is the Executive Director for the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization here in the Diocese of Tyler. Stacy, thank you so much for taking your time and being with us today.
Thank you. It's lovely to have a chance to talk with y'all.
The reason for our conversation is really to introduce you to maybe people here in Catholic Nacogdoches that don't really know you, and also what the Institute does, and yeah, all that. So first, are you a cradle Catholic or a convert?
I am very much a convert. I converted later in life, in my 30s. So a convert, still feels like new, still very excited to be Catholic.
Yeah. Well, so what is, so in that process, what were the 2, 3, 10 things that kind of helped you make that choice, make that jump?
Well, so I had a pretty radical conversion. I think it hits me more every day just how radical it was. I grew up in Texas, Baptist. I left my Baptist upbringing completely in college to go study science, which I hear is not a new path for a lot of young people. At the time, I thought I was charting my own unique way, but I turned my back on it, and really being a logical person, very scientifically minded, analytical, I fully lived the life of a materialist. And I never really called myself an atheist because that seemed like a religious title itself. It committed me to things when I wanted to free think for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I really committed to wholeheartedly was this idea of, as a chemist, which is what I studied, biology and chemistry. I was really committed to this idea that the human person is just a machine, a collection of atoms and molecules following the laws of nature. I had no way of talking about morality, no way of thinking systematically about it, so I just didn't. And I just adopted the attitude that flows from thinking you're just a collection of atoms and molecules and your life is just going to end when you die, that you just go through life doing whatever you want, and if somebody doesn't like it, it's their problem, not yours. And I was even like, how dare you stop me if I'm going to do what I'm going to do? And so I really lived that way, and knew deep down in my heart there was something not right, that, you know, we're made for communion, we're made to think and love. And I broke a lot of relationships. I didn't have any tools for dealing with relationships, so I just ended a lot of relationships when they got hard. And it just all caught up with me in my 30s. I had my PhD in chemistry. I had my dream job at the biggest chemical company in the world, DuPont. I was working on Lycra spandex, which, you know, was like a woman. I was very happy to be working on spandex. And but I had 2 kids and I was single, and the whole moral side of my life was a mess. And I just it just hit me one day, the way God does. It just came clear to me, you know, God is like, you have to ask these bigger questions. You have to ask who made all this chemistry stuff you so adore.
Was it an event that happened, or was it kind of a series of events that really helped you come to that, hearing God's voice that way?
Yeah, there was a lot to it. I mean, I write about the scientific part in Particles of Faith because it kind of did come down to one event. Just, it sounds dumb, but I was doing research on photosynthesis and simulating photosynthesis, and it just hit me one day looking out a window at a tree at Penn State in my laboratory, that those thousands and thousands of leaves are just doing photosynthesis all over the place. And here I am in a lab, like my whole graduation depends on being able to do 2 electron jumps. And I just had this moment where it was like, holy cow, there's a creator and he's a really great chemist. And, you know, I stuffed it that moment. I just turned away. I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, yeah, whatever, you want to do trees, just do your thing. I still have to graduate. And so I just blocked it. I didn't think about it, but it really then the part I haven't written much about, and some of it I just can't write about yet because the stories are still unfolding.
Mhm.
All the damage I did that way. My daughter was a child then, but she's 31 now, and she's going through a lot of the stuff I went through. Just you know, there's a lot of personal stuff I can't even write about yet, but it has taken me decades to learn how to accept that I'm a human person with a rational soul made for forming relationships with people, to even learn how to start to navigate those things. It's very vulnerable, very scary. How to even have a relationship with Jesus and Mary, and my husband and my children. And I'm learning every day more about that. It's taken decades to break that mindset, though. So I do a lot of talking. When I talk about evangelization now, I understand where a lot of people don't even know it yet with this materialism in our culture. I understand how much it can hurt a person to not accept the truths of Jesus Christ. Like, it's not just like an option, I'm going to believe in Jesus. It's like, if you want to get things right in your life, you need to listen to what Jesus told us. Otherwise, you're just going to be wandering off in these paths without the light of faith, and you'll get messed up.
Talked about relationships and forming those with Jesus and Mary. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing, I guess, that the Lord of the universe cares about each one of us. Because I can look at stars and I'm blown away by the science. I'm like, the stars, that's where the elements are being made by nuclear synthesis, and this stuff has been clicking away since almost the beginning of time, in some form or another, getting to that point since the beginning of time. And think about the universe expanding. Think about all the galaxies that are out there. Think about all the electrons that are just in your hand, and all the atoms making up your hand, and just all the air molecules circulating around. Am I breathing in an oxygen molecule that maybe has an atom in it that touched Christ when he was on the planet? Like, I just start thinking about all those things, and to think that given all of that amazing things that we know about the physical universe, the Lord of the universe is still like there to meet me in every mass, there, for communion in the most intimate way, in every mass, there as, my counselor and guide in every decision I'm trying to make. God, the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are there with gifts and wisdom and grace for me to figure out what I'm supposed to do in life. So I'm not kidding you. It's overwhelming to realize. That's one reason I didn't get too depressed during this whole COVID-19 thing. Because I missed going to mass, but I spent most of my life not going to mass. So I'm just going to be glad when I'm very, I believe there is spiritual communion. It's not quite the same as hugging your mother versus talking to your mother on the phone, but I still feel that relationship, and just looking forward to when we can all be back in the church together.
Yeah, you talk about the awe of what God has done. I don't know if you saw it, you probably haven't, but I did something about faith and science.
I knew you were doing that, yeah.
Yeah, and part of that is, the Bible really is, especially Genesis, the creation story, and then going into Jesus's, passion, death, and resurrection. Yeah, but yet you see also the created order and the 93, million light years across, like that God who made that actually cares about you, this little, creature on this, unbecoming planet. It's like, oh, that shows, yes, his level of condescension to us, and that shows real love.
Yep.
It's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Well, the fact that you knew God and Jesus, okay, that's great. Well then, but why be Catholic? You went from a Baptist to a nun, really, not an atheist, but a nun.
N-O-N-E, yeah.
N-O-N-E, yes.
Not an N-U-N.
Right. So why the Catholic Church? Because, as somebody who grew up in the South, I grew up in Oklahoma, people in the Bible Belt, you might as well be Amish or Mormon or something. Like, right. Catholic is weird.
I know. Yeah, well, I didn't live here then. When I went to school and studied science, and then I taught chemistry in Athens for 2 years, I just wanted to move away. I wanted to go to graduate school and study chemistry. And the college needed to be a good college, but it mostly needed to be as far away as from Texas as I could get. Penn State wasn't quite far enough away, but I got accepted there. And, I just wanted to get away. And so by the time I converted, I'd already graduated from Penn State and then worked for DuPont for a number of years and had that breakdown where I just realized nothing I thought I knew was right. And I prayed for the first time in many years, probably 15. And shortly thereafter, I met the man who's now my husband. Um, and so he was born in Havana, Cuba, and had come to the United States on a freedom flight to flee the Castro regime in 1961. So I meet this man who's very happy to be in the United States, who's had a successful career as a mathematician. So we hit it off that way. But
Two brains.
yeah, well, just analytical minds. We had a lot to talk about when we first met, and that was what God knew. That's what I needed. I needed someone who could be a person and bond with me, but also get the analytical side. And but he was a cradle Catholic because he has a sister, and his parents named him Jose and his sister Maria. So Joseph and Mary. His parents were very Catholic, but he himself wasn't really practicing. But when we got together and we got married, and our first child, I already had 2 children, but our first child was coming along, that's when I said, okay, I've straightened a lot of things out in my life, but this child needs to be raised with religion. And and I said, I need to know the truth about religion. And he literally said, I know this place. And so he took me to a Catholic church, and I found the catechism and started reading it and realized there are a lot of answers there to questions I had before in the Baptist church, and nobody knew the answer. And so it just kind of went from there. He went with me to every RCIA class, and I guess without meaning to, I led him back into the church because he was leading me to the church, because we both wanted to do the right thing for our family and for our marriage and to make it last. We've been married 17 years now. So that's why it was Catholic for me. The intellectual part came later, because honestly, I've learned now that I don't need to be so analytical about everything. Sometimes it's just an excuse. I learned to get in touch with
mystery.
Feelings. Yeah, I can do feelings now. I have a chart, but I can do feelings now. And that it was more the heart. Later, when I learned the Aquinas arguments for the proof of God, and I got all into that and the evolution stuff, and why should we believe in God? Isn't it self-evident? Well, it's self-evident if you're willing to admit it. But then why the triune God? Why not one of the other gods? That actually became clear to me when I started studying the history of science, that Father Yaki writes about, that what science was born of Christianity because of that worldview of everything having order. And that's when the intellectual part clicked in for me, but I was already fully on board with my heart. So I was just happy to hear that stuff. I was overjoyed. I mean, it was really awesome to see all that coming together.
Well, because it brought all of that together. It was really unifying for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it all fits together now. Philosophy, theology, and science. I love them all.
How did you end up at the Institute? How was that process kind of laid out for you? How did God lead you into that?
It's totally God. It's nothing I ever planned. Seriously. I moved around with my husband I quit my career when that baby was coming along. So when I started converting to Catholicism, it hit me that children are gifts, as you and your wife well know, with your beautiful children. They're gifts, and they're the most important thing you can do as a married couple. So he said if I wanted to stay home, I could. So I did. And then, fortunately he had a job that allowed that. And I followed him around a couple of moves with his job, but then when he was getting close to retirement and we were in New York, and he said, New York's not a good long-term plan for us for, reasons we won't get into,
Yeah.
called taxes. But he said, why don't we move back to Texas so you can be close to your family again? And, I'd moved away kind of mad at Texas. And so I was grown up now and ready to come back home to Texas. And we moved to East Texas, Hideaway near Lindale, because it's close to my parents. That was the only reason we moved to Tyler, is because it's close to my parents. Mm-hmm. And we moved here, got settled in Hideaway, and then that's about the time when people started talking about Bishop Strickland a lot, and I realized who he was. The people here at the diocese, and I'd started writing about faith and science because I'd written Particles of Faith, and so they asked me to come in and meet the bishop, and I came to meet Bishop Strickland and explain to him why I'd been away and why I came back now and what was going on with me. And I was going to work for the St. Philip Institute, just helping with publications because I'd published a few books. And just, I don't know, there wasn't a direct, by the time I got here and started that position, by the time I, started the work here, I was already living in Texas. We'd just moved. But by the time I started doing the work, there wasn't an executive director. And I kind of saw what was in front of me. Like, I'm at this institute that I really love, but there's no executive director there. And I just prayed for like 3 months. I didn't say or do anything. I just did, my job. And it just became clear that they were either going to have to do a nationwide search for an executive director, or I was feeling really prayerfully that, it kind of makes sense if you just mm-hmm. say you'll do it. And and I knew if I said I was willing, that would probably mean I would do it, because I already knew the people. I loved the mm-hmm. institute. I knew the Constitution. I had the skills to do those things. I had never had an executive position before, but my husband had, and I had the internet skills, and I'd been figuring out how to communicate with the worldwide Catholic audience for a long time in the faith and science arena. So it really was, there was like one day when it just hit me what I'm looking at and what might be in front of me. And I just got down on my knees right there in my bedroom at home and just like, I don't think I'm ready for this, God, but it was kind of, just seemed obvious. And so it worked out to be really good, because my husband is retired now, and he's just, I didn't want to go back to work while our kids were still young, but now they're grown up, and our youngest one's almost 10, so they're not babies anymore. And it just worked out that way, and I'm here. I never would have written this script. I never thought, oh, I'll leave DuPont and someday work for a bishop in Texas. But
East Texas. Yeah.
East Texas, back in East Texas.
That's right.
I hear, but it does make sense. Like, the more I think about it, the more I realize it. I love this institute. I love the people here. I love the people of Texas. It was me that left. It wasn't them. It was my hangups. I love the people of East Texas. I love the feeling that I'm back home, and that I'm also home in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. I get the people around here. I grew up thinking the way they think, so I mm-hmm. know this culture, and I also know a lot of the issues with young people turning away from the faith, and people asking questions about our faith and not knowing the Catholic teaching. So I've been through all that myself. I also have 7 kids now and 6 grandchildren, and so I've been doing the parenting thing for 3 decades, and have learned a lot on both sides of the faith fence as a parent. So I just think what God has done is, where the world says, if you become a PhD in chemistry and you go get a big job at DuPont and you leave it because you want to be a homemaker, you'll never work again. And the Catholic Church said, gee, we kind of appreciate your skills as a woman who's had all these life experiences. Maybe mm-hmm. you can help evangelize and catechize.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
The church said yes. So
well, great. So you mentioned Yeah, you mentioned the Constitution, and I've heard you talk in other places that you've kind of read that thing a bajillion times, to be specific. So tell me for those who don't know what the Constitution is,
Yeah.
what's a little bit of the contents and where did it what's its origin? Where did it come from?
The bishop, it's divinely inspired, I'm sure. There's no doubt about that. But Bishop Strickland wrote it when he had the vision for the Institute. He had a vision for the Institute to fill the vision for having a teaching structure in the diocese. He wanted to make sure that no one didn't know the Catholic faith. If you wanted, I mean, it's one thing just to pick up that brick that's called the catechism and say, I want to know the Catholic faith. It's another thing to have people accompanying you, because what you don't get in the catechism is how it relates to everyday life, which is where my experience with a mother probably is my best skill to bring to this job, because I know how you walk the walk in the light of faith. I know what the catechism means when it says the dogmas are lights along the path. Mm-hmm. They're what help you find your way to truth and goodness and to heaven and to Christ. And so when the church has teachings that are hard to understand, it's not like maybe I'll opt in, maybe I'll opt out. No, you have to believe what Christ told us, because every doctrine in the church is derived from the dogmatic truths that Christ told us. And it all fits together. It's not a cafeteria. And that's what Bishop wanted, was a way for people to be taught not just the theological truths, but how they relate to our life. Like, why does it matter to teenagers whether they think they're a lump of tissue or whether they understand what it means to have a rational soul? It's everything. You can't teach them virtue if they don't understand that. And, it's just stuff like that that helps you. I mean, I've got 4 teenage daughters right now and 2 grown children, and it's not easy being a teenager in this day and age. It's not easy, and you need the Catholic teaching to help them, not just a relationship with Jesus like the Protestants have. You need that fullness of truth more than ever in these days to help them navigate this globally connected internet world.
Yeah. What is everybody's kind of day-to-day role? Yes, we have broad things, but what do you do all day?
Yeah, what do we do all day? We actually, when the COVID-19 thing hit, I think we were busier than ever trying to figure out how to communicate digitally. But what we do all day is there's different components. There's one level, it's the long-term planning. So we always keep the Constitution in mind. We're always checking, is this implementing the Constitution? Is this fulfilling? I told the bishop, we've got your back. Are we fulfilling his vision? But then there's the next level down, there's more the management and supervision of things, making sure that you have the right people on the right jobs, making sure that people understand what they need to do, and making sure they understand how their contributions are benefiting the whole. And just a lot of it's like managing a family, but this is an organization. But just making sure all the employees know what their task is, know what their contribution is, and they need to always see the bigger picture too. So they need to be, if they're not always part of the decision, they at least need to know what that vision is so they can buy into it. And we usually, when we have staff meetings, everybody's there. So we want to hear everybody's thoughts. But then there's another level down from that. Is like, what do you do today? What are we gonna do tomorrow? What are we gonna do this week? A lot of it is working on digital resources like the website, MailChimp communication, managing our email addresses, making phone calls, reaching out to each parish in the diocese. That's an ongoing thing, making phone calls and reaching out to people, asking them, they have the materials, if they have any questions, or they need help implementing it, helping with internet issues and stuff. And then there's a whole lot of following. I'm very data driven, so everything has to in some way be measurable. So I spend a lot of time just looking at the full picture of, our success on Facebook. How is that translating into getting people on board, getting people to buy into what we're doing? How does that translate into growing our funds? We don't want to just be subsidized by the diocese. We want to do so well at fundraising in and outside the diocese that we can give back, that we can really help grow the diocese around here. So a lot of time looking at data there for me, just number crunching, trying to, that's where my chemistry serves me well, because I know how to think of atoms and systems of chemical reactions, thermodynamics and kinetics. I know how to think in all those dimensions. And so my materialism helps me there. But I also know that I'm not dealing with atoms and molecules. I'm dealing with people with free will. And that's one of the hardest things we have to do. And the team hears me say this all the time. It's not enough to say, we're going to have this webinar, we're going to have this retreat, we're going to have this course, we're going to write this essay, we're going to make this video. You can't just go down and check all the boxes. That is not really doing our job. We have to say at the end of it all, how well did we lead people? How well did we influence people to know their Catholic faith better? It's not enough just to make a video. You got to say, how well did that video reach people? How well did people like it? And you're not in control of that. You can't be a chemist can be a control freak. I mean, you can make them the atoms do what you want them to do if you get the conditions right, but you can't control people that way. You're very much left to the graces of the Holy Spirit to speak the truth well and eloquently and smartly and in a way that connects with people where they are, so that's that mysterious part of being a leader. And so we're always looking at that part too. Like, we're analyzing everything in those terms.
How many years have you been there at the Institute?
Let's see, just about October 2018. So coming up just about a little over a year and a half.
Okay. And so up until this point, so before your time and even during your time, what has the Institute already done? How has it lived out Bishop Strickland's vision in the Constitution?
Yeah, we have, so one of the things, if you're going to implement a teaching structure, you need standardized teaching materials for the whole diocese to use. So we have the youth formation program that Father Justin Braun's working on the second year of that, but the first year is out. It got out a little bit late last year, but it's ready there for this coming fall. We have the baptism program, so that as it's produced now, as it gets implemented, and that's what our team is working on, making the phone calls, talking to priests and baptism coordinators and showing people how to use it. But once it's implemented, once it's being used in all the parishes, the process for baptism will be the same anywhere you go. And it's not just the rite of baptism, it's all the formation for the whole family leading up to it, and then especially following after it to make sure the child is raised in the faith. We have Deanna Johnston working on marriage formation, similar thing, just different season of life. All the things that are needed, not just, so the first thing she did was implement a program for engaged couples, and then for accompanying the married couple afterwards, and even getting mentor couples to help with the engaged couples. But the next part of that process, the next bigger part, is to start working with people before they're even engaged, talking about what marriage looks like, what's the point of dating, and people even further on the other end of life. And also the biggest thing in front of us the next few years is talking to people who are civilly married but not sacramentally married, and explaining to them the significance of the grace in marriage, and providing a path for them to actually achieve that and have that grace. So whole family catechesis. So we got all those programs underway. They're all in different stages of implementation, the goal being that it's all done the same way throughout the diocese, but it'll never be a point where we just stop. It's always going to take working with the people and keeping our products better and better and better so that they meet those needs. There's also the Way of Christ, which is for adult faith formation. We have a whole set of videos and quizzes for that, so that people who are doing faith formation, adults, can work on their faith at home. So they don't have to take the big catechism and get through all of it. They have a minor catechism in the Way of Christ to just get into. So it's just a wet your whistle kind of, and get into the deeper teachings and introduce them into that. And we have the Faith and Life series for the young people. So we've covered all the seasons of life, and now we're just we're working to get it implemented throughout. And meanwhile, like the Constitution, Bishop envisions us like a tree where we focus on the roots, our own diocese, and implement these programs. But at the same time, if you're speaking the truth, it's true to everybody. At the same time, really being leaders out in the global Catholic community about the importance of teaching and evangelizing at large. So we do a whole lot of connecting. We had a webinar with Australia last night.
All that, yeah.
So, we're doing that, and we've been connecting with lots of people. We did a podcast this morning with Debbie Vintage, who is the woman back in 2005 that wrote to the Vatican for guidance on vaccines with fetal cell lines. And so she's very knowledgeable in this area. We're hoping to have Dan Burke and probably Scott Hahn on a podcast. So we're trying to bring the experience from out there to the diocese and also reach out. And I see it. It took me a while to get that whole spirit of what we're doing, but again, that's where it's helpful that I know Texas. Bishop Strickland is just true Texas, he's true to his Texas roots. And it's endearing to the rest of the world because I didn't really realize it when I was a snotty teenager just trying to move away. But there's something about the straight talk here. There's something about we don't put on any airs. We're just going to speak it plain. And that straight talk, I mean, people, I know because I moved north, people mistake that for idiocy or ignorance because you have that Texas twang and you just talk plain. You don't need to have all these big fancy words. It's not ignorance. It's a very deep smartness, I think I would call it. There's intelligence there. Don't try to take a Texan for granted. So especially if you're like negotiating a deal, like buyer beware. But Texans have this beautiful, gutsiness that I think it's endearing to people outside of Texas, and I think understanding that about the people around here too hopefully will help us to evangelize more people in this area. I mean, the diocese is like 10% Catholic, and that's troubling. But you got to be careful there because you don't want to go out. We love Jesus too. It's just like the Protestants love Jesus. You don't want to like make enmity with our brothers and sisters in Christ. You want to make friendship. But at the same time, you want them to find the fullness of truth as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you spoke a little bit of it, but tell me maybe like what's the 10-year plan? What's the like 30-year plan?
Our 10-year plan is to achieve standardization, raise the standards, convert more people around here, bring them to Christ, bring them to the church, grow the numbers. I mean, just really grow the numbers in the church around here. Make sure everybody has a consistent experience when they go to different parishes with the faith formation and the sacramental formation. And then part of the equation as well is to bring in funds from outside the diocese too. Because there are lots of it. That's where it's beneficial to be an institute. There are lots of institutes that are Catholic out there. I don't know of any that have a bishop who is the head of a diocese as the founder of the institute. But if we're successful at providing the greater Catholic world with stuff they need and stuff they value, then we'll be successful at bringing in funds to benefit our own East Texans here, and in turn to benefit everybody else too. So it's like a tree. The branches are the global Catholic community, bringing in the photons from the sun, turning it into oxygen. And the root, I know when Bishop said that the tree should be the analogy, I'm like, I'm on it. But then the roots are our own diocese, and you need both. We can't ever neglect one or the other. So we want to really grow that tree in both directions.
Well, cool. Awesome. Great. Well, I'm thinking of things like universities or seminaries or like selling those products that you guys make to other, making it a, I don't know, publishing house or something, you know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Are those in the plans or no?
Could be. That's definitely on the radar of a possibility if it makes sense. When I first started here, I was director of publishing because I was going to help get some things published because I know that value.
The process.
Yeah, I know how to get, what comes next, what comes next, what comes next. And that's where I got the vision and the breathing life into it, because when you write a book, you have to have the vision. And that's the fun part. But all that writing and editing, it's hard. And sometimes you're like, I don't even want, I felt like when I wrote my books that I'd like birthed something because it was so hard. And there were times when I'm like, I'm done with that book now. Like, I'm never looking at it again because I'm sick of it. And you have to keep going. But, that's what we're doing here. That's the reason we're doing things we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. Well, great. We talked a little bit about the science of things. I guess narrowing down to the Catholic world, obviously you have that, science was born of Christianity. Have you experienced any pushback? People who think that those two things are in opposition?
Oh, yeah, a lot. My talking about science was kind of it was kind of, I guess, God's way of leading me into evangelization at large. The only reason I ever started talking about science was born of Christianity or particles of faith. It was always about evangelization. I just figured out that was where I could really do my best job of leading people to Christ, was the science and faith thing, because I knew it so well. And I'd hear people talk about it and I'd be like, no, that, they're all talking about all these complex scientific concepts and how they fit with faith. And like, it's just really simple. We just got to get people first to understand that modern science wouldn't have even been born if it weren't for the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And even if they don't want to say that, you can't deny that it was born in the Christian West, in the Catholic universities, among Catholic scholars who had the worldview that God is the creator of an ordered mm-hmm. and loving creation. So that's the underlying thing of everything. And then in part, that was my message in that first book. And then the next message in the second book was Particles of Faith is science is the study of the handiwork of God. When you're studying science, you're studying God's creation, plain and simple. And when you have that view, that very Catholic view of science, there is no conflict myth. And so I just kept it real simple, and it was a successful message because it just resonates with people. It doesn't matter how old you are or how much you know about science, the message is simple to get. And yeah, there were lots of people that opposed what I was saying. There were lots of atheists, especially because I was kind of one of them, I guess, although I was never one of them, but they lost me to Catholicism. And I got a lot of nasty things said about me along the way, but I think that's not anything surprising. It was shocking at first. It made me mad at first. It made me more determined. But yeah, I've definitely met a lot of people. I've met a lot of definitely atheists. I've had an atheist tell me before when I said science was born in Christianity, he said he spit coffee all over his computer screens. He thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And I think that's when I said, I'm going to write a book about it then. And I did. And I had atheists after that, like, man, I can't refute what you're saying, but still just thank you very much, Catholic Church, for science. Now go away. And, like they couldn't even argue the points, but.
Right. Yeah. Well, but for those who love Jesus, right, who are reading their Bible and they think that those, if they have to make a choice,
yeah,
how do you help them recognize that they don't have to make it's a false dichotomy? How do you help them understand that?
If science is the study of the handiwork of God, your choice to love science means you're trying to get to know your creator better. And why do we get to know God better? So we can love him more. So it's that simple. Like, just let it go. Just let it go. This conflict there, that's a making of from the atheist side. Don't play their game. Just, if it comes down to it, are you saying you're putting faith before science? Yeah, because my faith helps me, it illuminates the world I see. It helps me understand science better. Mm-hmm. And they're like, prove it, prove it, prove it. Well, it's not something you prove. It's something that you believe in certainty, and it makes sense. But yeah, but I didn't really do this to help atheists as much as I did it to help Christians because it's just so simple. You don't have to pick between the two. And once you get in Particles of Faith, I think that's what I accomplished is once you get that down, once you understand that, okay, now that we've wiped all the cobwebs away, science is a study of the handiwork of God. Now let's talk about quantum mechanics and evolution and free will and neuroscience. And the beginning of life. Now let's talk about all those things with the right
But in
perspective.
scientific terms, you know, we don't have to
Yeah.
reject the science, but knowing where it came from, that God did this.
Yep. And when you teach Catholic school students chemistry, so I've taught chemistry in high school off and on, when you tell Catholic students that, you're just like inoculating them from any of this nonsense about the myths, because they're never going to go out there thinking they should be looking at chemistry or physics to refute their faith.
Right.
And so that's the point of it. And it does change the conversation. I've seen it change in the last 10 years. It gets rid of that wasting our time on the conflict myth and moving on to, how does neuroscience, even from an atheist neuroscientist, but how do we take the data they're getting and understand more about ourselves as human? How do we understand more about what it means to say we have a rational soul, but we're also a physical body? And you can actually start diving into the theological areas that need development with the contribution of science. And in turn, the light of theology can help guide the science in a better direction. Because if science starts going off in this false direction, like bioethics does, it's a dead end. So what I am starting to see and what I hope to see more of is at the scholarly level, where people are going on and studying those issues, but even just around dinner tables, the conversation is changing. There's not so much, oh my gosh, I have to pick science or faith. Just let it go. You can love science if you want to, and then move forward about how, I guess the way I've said it before is complete the scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution was this separation of modern science away from philosophy and theology. And I've challenged young people in your lifetime, bring it back together, but in a more mature way. So science was born of Christianity. Now science is kind of like went through those teenage years where it thought it knew everything and didn't need its mama. And now
and it's coming back to Texas.
Now science is coming back home. Now in a more mature science going forward, we can have this science that's not just physical science. It starts to have a conversation with theology and philosophy about how to understand our place in the world better. And I do think we're starting to see that. I think we're living in a moment when the scientific revolution occurred, the conflict myth is starting to die out. It's like yawn, tired, irritated. And I think the scholars or the kids are going on to study science and theology and philosophy are going to be the ones sitting at the tables in the next 10 or 20 years, really pushing some of those very, very, very interesting boundaries.
Cool. Awesome. Mending those two, that's a good segue, because we can, with science, we know how to clone people and we can do embryonic stem cell research, but that doesn't mean that we should, right? Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. Yeah. And you and the bishop have talked about the vaccine for the coronavirus and where the moral quandaries come.
Yeah, it's such a tough issue. I mean, it's a bioethics question, and I'm just trying to figure out where to start, that I don't talk for an hour. I mean, I started with this back in 2005 when Debbie Vintage wrote that letter to the Vatican and said there are vaccines made using cell lines from aborted fetuses. And what that means is, I'm sure you know this, I'm just going to cover it for the audience,
for everybody.
Because what that means is that they took an organ from an aborted child, like a liver or a lung, and they took cells from that, and they were stem cells, so they were able to reproduce a lot, and they started growing those cells. And so they have the cell line that have been just reproducing cells. The original cells came from the child, but the cell line itself was reproducing immortally, because they use that as the medium in which they grow the vaccine. So the vaccine is a little bit of the disease, and they grow it a little bit so they can put it in vaccines and, you know, give you enough to inoculate you from catching the full disease. And there are other cell lines. There are cell lines from plants. There are cell lines from insects. There are cell lines that don't come from aborted children, but the ones from humans, in some cases, were, if you're just talking about the science, were more usable. So we have that. When you're a parent trying, and the moral guidance from the Vatican was, if you're a parent sitting in a doctor's office and you say, I don't want to use that vaccine that's been developed using an aborted child, I don't care if it was back in the 60s or 70s or 80s, I don't want to be any part of that. You don't have a choice. Sometimes you can get a morally produced vaccine, but most of the time you can't. You know, the 7 kids I've had, I've vaccinated them in 5 different states. And so you never know what you're going to get, even from one year to the next, even if you're in the same place. So you can't always get those vaccines, and you end up you're morally coerced, is what the Vatican said, into using an illicitly produced vaccine. And that parents in that situation they have a immediate remote licit cooperation in evil, meaning we weren't there to make the decisions to use the aborted child. We weren't there to do the work using the aborted child. We're just at the very far end of the value chain, so to speak, with no other choice when it comes to protecting our own children. And so the Vatican said, in those situations, yes, you're very, very, very little participating in an evil, but you kind of do that anything you do in going to the grocery store, trying to live your life. You never know if there's some remote connection to an evil choice. And so you can go ahead. But the thing that a lot of people missed is the Vatican said, you also have an obligation to protest this being done anymore. And that's where we are with the COVID-19 vaccine.
This is new, not something that's in the past.
New. Yeah, and so a lot of people took what the Vatican said in 2005 to mean, don't worry about it, it's okay, you can use the vaccine. And a lot of people are saying now, well, if they develop the COVID-19 vaccine using, literally it's using an aborted child from 1985, that's what Johnson & Johnson's lab is doing. They're saying it's okay if they do that, and it's not. And so all the bishop and I and everybody else on board with this are asking is that we protest. And, by golly, for all the times I, as a mother, sat in the doctor's office angry that I was put in that position, I would cry about it. Like I had to, it wasn't just an abstract concept for me. And I know that you and your wife know what I'm talking about. When I saw that needle go into my child's skin, I was like, I think I said some pre-Catholic cuss words, but I was mad about it. And, it just angered me. And I said, if I ever get the chance to talk about this in a way that actually will make a difference, God, give me that opportunity. And what we have right now, all of us, is with the COVID-19 vaccine, if we say, we won't take that vaccine. The bishop said, I won't kill children to live, because he's got a great economy with words.
You can't do evil so that good can come from it. That's like Catholic morality 101.
Yeah. And if we don't speak up now, I mean, this is just me saying this, but I think it would be sin. I think it would be sin to say right now, I'm not going to speak up. I know we need to protest. I know we need to say something. And I'm not talking about like major, but just let it be known that we're not going to take those vaccines. Let your doctors know, let the chemical companies know, and we're working on a way to be able to do that. But for sure, let your doctors know, we won't take that vaccine. And if that message gets back to the chemical companies and the pharmaceutical companies, it will change their decisions. The good news that we talked to Debbie Vintage about this morning, and we'll have that podcast out soon, there are ethically produced COVID-19 vaccines that are now winning the race.
Awesome.
And so if we keep the pressure on, we won't find ourselves a year from now being required to take a vaccine that, we can say a year from now, we don't have to make that choice because we spoke up when we were supposed to.
Yeah.
The bishop's awesome leading the way on this. We are so lucky to have him.
Yeah. Thank you for everything that you do at the Institute and, for the Diocese of Tyler. We just, just speaking for me personally, I I am so happy that you're here back in East Texas and
Thank you.
speaking the way that you do about, you know, all kinds of matters, and that everybody there at the Institute are really working hard and coming out with really good stuff. Thank you, Dr. Trasancos, for your time, and good luck with everything at the Institute. I very much
Thank you.
appreciate it. You have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.